Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of this workshop. It looks like we're starting slowly. People are trickling in. That's always the second day is a bit like that. You know, people go out to eat, have a couple of drinks as well, have a bit of difficulty getting up, I guess, in the morning. Worst I've seen is in Munich, Oktoberfest. You know, the second day is a disaster. Okay, so I hope, you know, our attendance was more serious than that. You know, we're starting with the first talk here, which is by Jaydee Griffith, who is the Chief Technologist for the Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund, the 1.5 billion, that's a lot of money, federal grant program to advance open, interoperable, and innovative radio access network solutions for the US and beyond. And he's also providing technical expertise to the US government telecom policy on 5G and open interoperable wireless networks. He engages with international partners, that is us, among them, and especially on the importance of open interoperable networks, network security, and trusted telecom supply chains. And the title of his talk today is US Government Initiatives to Advance Open and Interoperable Networks. Jaydee, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be first up. The coffee has not yet kicked in, so please bear with me. Really excited to be here today. I love the good presentations that we had yesterday and the good discussion we had around open interoperable networks, open source solutions to support the telecom industry. And I'm glad to be able to spend some time today talking about what NTIA and the US government kind of broadly is doing in this space. So some of you are probably wondering, why is the US government involved to begin with? So we kind of look at this open interoperable networks piece from two different lenses. One is a security piece, both in terms of like, no kidding, cybersecurity. We've heard a lot about how open and interoperable networks and even open source software, you know, by opening up the curtain, even if there are risks, at least you're aware of what they are instead of kind of be like, ignore the guy behind the curtain, nothing to see here, trust me, everything's fine. Avoiding that and getting it so the end user or the network operator has better visibility into what is actually going inside the network that they own and they're responsible for. Part of it's also from a supply chain perspective. We talk about a lot in the US government about trusted and untrusted suppliers. To no one's surprise, by untrusted, we mean Huawei and ZTE. Who would have thought? When we looked at the United States banned Huawei and ZTE and other untrusted suppliers from our telecom networks. From like a 5G perspective, we're left with Nokia and Ericsson, and in the distant third place, Samsung. Given the way the current dynamics of the market and the lack of interoperability between those three suppliers, we did not think that was enough competition to begin with. So we wanted to see how we could add more competition in the market to ensure that telecom suppliers and then the more nascent private wireless space could have better access to more competitive solutions to help drive innovation and bring down costs. So that's kind of like the twofold approach why we're looking at this, both from a trusted supplier perspective and also from security, but also from a competition on how we can also make the supply chains more resilient. More competition means I can, if you know, a factory goes down in one part of the world and I can't get radios anymore, makes it a lot easier to change suppliers if need be, versus now, which is unfortunately in a lot of places, tear everything out and then put in the new guy, and who knows how long your network's going to be down and how many issues you're going to run into the process. So two key examples of how the US government has been pushing forth open and interoperable network policy is this year we released the National Cybersecurity Strategy, and there's a section on that just on creating trusted supply chains. So building on the national strategy, Secure 5G, we are working with our partners to develop secure, reliable, and trustworthy supply chains for 5G and next generation networks, including through Open Radio Access Networks, Open RAN, and collaborative initiatives to diversify suppliers. So we work a lot, especially with the Quad governments, so Australia, Japan, and India, and then also bilaterally with Canada, with the United Kingdom. We're starting to have some more talks with Germany and Finland. But if some of you may have been tracking in the telecom news, with the United Kingdom recently announced the Global Coalition on Telecommunications, which I'll touch on here in a moment. This is an example of some of these, our partners that we're working with to help diversify these supply chains from a government to government level. Also, I believe 2021 Executive Order 14036, promoting competition in the American economy. This was more of a push towards the Federal Communications Commission, but it signaled how the executive branch is looking at open radio access networks also from that supply chain perspective. How can we increase diversity of the suppliers in the US market to ensure better competition and better innovation? So from the international piece, as everyone mentioned, we are, OAI is a big international partner in the space. So a couple of key agreements that my other day job hat is in the Office of International Affairs. The product proposals on telecom supplier diversity. This came out of the 2021 Prague 5G Security Conference. We currently have 8 governments endorsing. We're really excited about that. That's kind of been a very foundational document in getting a lot of the international community aligned on what it actually, what supplier diversity actually means. How do we support diversified telecom supply chains beyond just saying, yeah, supplier diversity, it's great. But actually put some concrete policy principles behind it. I know I'm in a room full of engineers, and policy is a weird 5-letter word that doesn't make any sense. So trust me, it has bearing because I have $1.5 billion that came out of a policy program. Then we also have kind of a follow-up to the Prague proposals, which was the UK Open RAN Principles and Joint Statement. So the joint statement amongst the 4 governments listed here. But the UK went kind of that next step into like, okay, specific to Open RAN, here's what we believe our principles for Open RAN is. Because from a government perspective, Open RAN is more than just the ORAN Alliance. It is a broader, like, okay, what are the principles behind open and interoperable radio access networks? Here's the, I think, 4 or 5 points that we think actually make something open and interoperable beyond just, you use some ORAN Alliance specifications. Those specifications are very important, but we want to be clear that like we're looking at that inch deeper of like, what does this actually mean from like a practical perspective? And then I touched on the Global Coalition on Telecommunications, or GCOT. The first 5 signatories, I guess, it's not really a treaty. It's just an informal agreement on this. We actually had a meeting yesterday to discuss next steps on how we can cooperate together amongst our 5 countries to advance open interoperable networks and a number of other telecom issues. So the governments are still building steam. It's still government. The gears turn slow, but we are definitely taking an international approach to this because it isn't just a U.S. market. This isn't just our interest. This is not just to make a U.S. a leading player in telecom again. It is to ensure that we have a global ecosystem of trusted suppliers in competition so we can improve security and drive down prices globally. Now, the U.S. government agencies involved. There's a lot more on this screen than you probably expected. NTIA has been involved a lot until the Innovation Fund and the policy and development and outreach work of the U.S. government. We've worked quite well with our colleagues at the Federal Communications Commission. While the FCC is an independent regulator, meaning they are not under the thumb of the executive branch, they do still align with the executive branch on open radio access networks and the need for that additional competition and the additional security it can provide. Within the Commerce Department, we've also worked a lot with the Commercial Law Development Program. They work especially with developing country governments to help them better understand, more generally telecom regulation, but especially how their regulations apply to secure networks. A lot of countries, the government puts a lot more of a thumb on the telecom industry than we necessarily see in the United States. I'm sure if there's any operators in the room, if Tracy's here, she's like, but the US already has too many requirements, like not compared to like Uganda, trust me. So how can we work with these governments to have a more free market telecom ecosystem that includes the supply chain and not necessarily the government mandating particular suppliers, but ensuring that there still is a trusted supply chain and how that government oversight works there. That's also done in close collaboration with our State Department. So State Department does a lot more of the political engagement, where the Commerce Department does a lot more of the economic engagement. And we work very closely on working with our international partners on advancing these policy initiatives. And then our friends at the National Security Agency. The NSA has been really interested in this from a cybersecurity standpoint, because they do see both the benefits of that additional visibility, but also, as we heard Ollie talk about yesterday, adding those more touch points into the network does create more security risks. So they've been very instrumental through the Enduring Security Framework. I highly recommend you check out some of their recommendations and guidance online. The ESF program is provided for like cloud-based 5G systems and some of their initial work on Open RAN. Now we get into the R&D space. So as I mentioned, NTIA, we have a $1.5 billion grant program, the Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund. So this was originally authorized in the fiscal year 2021 National Defense Authorization Act. That's a mouthful, like most government programs. And then it was funded through the CHIPS and Science Act. So that's if you see us lumped in with a lot of CHIPS Act programs, that's why, it's because we were funded through the same bill, but it was actually authorized through separate legislation. This is really, it has 7 key principles of why or how we're advancing open interoperable networks around research and development, deployment, network function virtualization, securing the supply chain, improving integration techniques, and 2 others I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's a lot of interesting overlap, but a lot of synergistic work to help advance this ecosystem. And so we have $1.5 billion going towards that. Our colleagues at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, are doing a lot of research on the standards work in the Open RAN space, as well as doing some wireless research. NSF, you heard SJ talk about that yesterday. I won't go too much detail on what NSF is doing, as y'all are very aware of what they have going on. And then the Defense Department. So a lot of work on Open RAN and 5G has been done through the Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. A lot of the 5G work is moving to the DoD CIO's office, and we'll be continuing there. But while the R&E team focuses a lot more on future G and 6G, but there's still a heavy emphasis in both groups and across the entire DoD enterprise on Open RAN and how that can be used to help both kind of improve connectivity at bases and through logistics systems, but also eventually support the warfighter out in the field. And then an interesting one people don't always think about is the Department of Energy. A couple different DoD labs, such as Idaho National Lab and the Pacific Northwest National Lab, have been supporting a lot of work in this space around Open RAN, particularly on the security side, but including a little bit of work on how Open RAN can be used to improve connectivity of critical infrastructure for our energy networks, so gas, electric, and so on. Now we move into deployment. So this has been a lot more internationally focused. This is leaning a lot more on the security piece that I touched on earlier. There's been less deployment programs in the US. We could argue, okay, there's the FCC rip and replace, but that did not have an explicit Open RAN component other than the FCC saying you can use Open RAN, that's allowed. But the 4G rip and replace in the United States did not have a explicit Open RAN incentive or requirement. But we are working a lot with our international foreign assistance agencies, the State Department, the US Trade and Development Agency, the US Agency for International Development, the Export-Import Bank, and the Development Finance Corporation on how we can support developing countries that are trying to weigh between some really nice financing from untrusted suppliers to basically get advanced networks for little to no cost, but there's some strings attached, or how can we, the US government, help promote these open interoperable networks, Open RAN, but also trusted suppliers, including incumbents like Nokia, Ericsson, and Samsung, to help enter into these networks. So that's been a lot of our work done thus far. Again, government's a clunky bureaucracy. We have a lot of them. Each agency has a different set of requirements on what they're allowed to fund and how much they're allowed to fund. So we're trying to work across the interagency to have a more cohesive strategy on how we fund some of these initiatives overseas. One I did not flag here because it's still kind of in its early stage is the FCC 5G Fund for Rural America. They did have a recent further notice of proposed rulemaking, again, another long government term, where they are explicitly interested and asked about should there be an Open RAN component of this $9 billion deployment program, and if so, what? So we're really excited to see how the FCC's 5G fund can go. I thought I had a lot of money with $1.5 billion. They have $9 billion. So it'll be really interesting to see how we can put some more government dollars in to help advance, give that good shove in the correct direction towards open interoperable networks. So specifically on some of what NTIA and the US government's been doing on R&D, some of our innovation fund work has been more on enabling short-term successes. A lot of you are familiar with our first notice of funding opportunity, which was released this spring. We are looking to establish more testing centers in the United States, but to help have more cohesive testing requirements that are more open, less variable, and reduce some of the, we should improve transparency. I was going to use like 3 double negatives. Improve transparency amongst the testing centers, because right now, unless you're kind of in the inner cone of trust of some of the OTICs, and it does become difficult to understand what each one is doing and how that is clearly working across the Open RAN ecosystem. So we're looking to help provide a little bit more long-term support, and then as we heard of yesterday, make it a lot easier for small companies who don't have laboratories full of millions and millions of dollars of equipment, make it easier for them to access some of these testing resources, either at free or reduced cost. We're also doing our colleagues at DoD have also done some early Open RAN use case testing, especially in logistics and depot operations. The most notable is the warehouse test bed at Marine Corps Logistics Base in Albany, Georgia. Very interesting work. Definitely a lot of lessons learned and some things to improve for the future, but definitely very insightful on what this technology can do and how 5G connectivity can improve operations. But we're also trying to establish more long-term foundations. So NSF rings, SJ's here is going to throw a tomato at me because I'm probably going to get this wrong, but the NSF partnered with DoD, NIST, and a lot of private sector entities to accelerate some of the research areas that will be really impactful to late 5G and 6G technology, especially in mobile communication, networking, sensing, and the computing systems that support those networks. We are looking at some of these within NTIA. It kind of comes up in the what's next in R&D. So as SJ touched on, DoD, NIWC, Pacific, and NSF had the RFI on FutureG that recently came out. I believe that proceeding closed recently or is still open for another week or so. Recommend checking that out. NSF Rings 2.0, there isn't a specific timeline on that, but I'm really excited to see the good work that our colleagues at NSF are doing and how we can collaborate on moving that forward. And then the Innovation Fund, our second notice of funding opportunity, we released this spring. I'm really excited, we're working hard. I wish I could share more details, but unfortunately, since it's a competitive grant program, I can't talk about it. But I think it'll be a really good next step in how do we advance these open interoperable networks, improving what we have right now for 5G and how we look at network refreshes and deployments of 5G going into countries that don't have it yet or have not started their deployments. But also looking at how we set this open interoperable foundation into 6G. Really exciting work going on. The US government's doing a lot in this space. Really excited to collaborate with industry and academia. So I look forward to seeing more how open source initiatives like the OAI work and the ORAN software community have been working together and how this can help set the foundation for future work going forward, both funded by NTIA and then also what industry develops on their own. I don't think I ate up all my time, so I'm happy to answer any questions. But thank you all very much. It's been really great being here today.
A quick question on the NOFO. You had the NOFO 1 in June. Was it kind of done? Like, were all the decisions were made on NOFO 1 and before you are issuing NOFO 2?
Great question. So have all the decisions been made? Yes and no. Short answer, the decisions have been made. They have not been announced because the gears of government still turn slow. We're in the process of some of the proposals that were selected need a little bit of curing to, dot all the I's, cross all the T's, make sure everything is compliant with our regulations for grant programs. But also, we have to get everything set up in our grants management system, get our grants officers to sign off everything. We have to notify Congress because Congress wants to know before anyone else does. So I would say a lot of those selections have been made. Any day now, they should start to be announced. But it is kind of still of a slow process. But that should all the NOFO 1 awards should be announced by the end of the year. Fingers crossed. Yeah, definitely by NOFO 2, all the notifications will have been made.
Hi, I had a question. Is workforce development one of the focus areas of what the NTIA is looking to fund?
Great question. So in the NDAA, there was not any explicit workforce focus. Now that said, we had a request for comment earlier this year that went out, or at the end of last year that went out, and a big response we heard from that is the issues with workforce development. How do we advance this workforce? We need a combination of like hardcore telecom expertise, but RF engineers that aren't afraid of software and virtualization, and merging those two skill sets. I think we can all in this room attest that that is a very difficult thing to find. Trying to merge those two skill sets and be able to leverage both the expertise of the software world and the telecom world. Outside of the fact that we do have a lot of the brain trust in the telecom space is, reaching the end of their career, wanting to move on to a better life in retirement. And we don't necessarily have the workforce already to backfill those positions. So that said, we do not have anything, we do not currently have, nor are we likely to have anything explicitly like, here's a grant just for workforce development, because it doesn't necessarily align with the mandates outlined in the NDAA, but we are looking to cooperate with some existing workforce development initiatives in government. The Department of Labor is leading one of them. And then we're also looking to how we can integrate more workforce development into our future grant programming, whether it be through research assistantships, internships with private industry, but aligning it around what we're actually focusing our work on. So if you do get like an award for whatever topic it may be, part of that would include either requirement and likely additional funding to support internships and other education programs to help make sure we have a workforce that knows how to work in this space.
I have a question. I think this week or recently, NTIA and few others met with the administration about opening up the spectrum, few more.
Yes, the National Spectrum Strategy.
Yes, so can you talk a little bit of what the new bands or spectrum will be opened up or anything like that?
That's a great question for our Office of Spectrum Management. I don't know any detailed specifics. I do know it's about 2.25 gigahertz of total spectrum they're looking to open it up. And one that I think is of particular interest to a lot of this group is there's about 1.125 gigahertz of spectrum, so from 7125 to 8.5, I think, that they're looking to how we can, that whole contiguous chunk of spectrum could be opened up in some ways. Now, there's a lot of incumbent federal systems, satellite communication systems, radar systems used by DoD. We've kind of reached the point where the stuff that's easy to relocate to open up more contiguous spectrum we've done, and then we're in the part where it gets a lot more difficult. So it isn't necessarily, cost effective in the long run to spend billions, if not trillions of dollars relocating all these federal systems just to recuperate maybe some of that in auction fees. So we are looking at a lot of spectrum sharing in that coexistence model. CBRS was a step in the right direction. I'm sure we all have our thoughts about CBRS, but it was at least a first step, and we learned a lot about this coexistence model and how we work with both fixed incumbent systems and with itinerant incumbent systems, such as like naval ship radar. The short answer is we're definitely going to look at a lot more studies. I don't have a whole lot more insights beyond that, but we'll at least identify what this next stretch of spectrum lines. Most of it is in that FR3 band, 7 to 24 gigahertz. So there's a lot of work that we're still looking to get done in that space.
Thank you.
You can check it out on ntia.gov.
Any other questions?
If not, I'll be around. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you
yeah.
something. Well, since we have time, you showed a list of partners there, and on one of the initial 1 or 2, page 1 or 2.
Or the government.
Yeah, and I saw Czech Republic there and a few others, but I don't see much of Europe. Is there any specific reason for that?
Let's talk at a break.
Yeah. Okay. Good. We can do that.
I will say there are some individual countries, like Czech Republic's on this list. We've talked a lot with Germany. We're starting to talk a little bit more with Finland. There's definitely a lot more bilateral engagement with Europe, and we had some conversations with the European Commission writ large on these issues. But there are some governments in Europe that either just aren't interested because telecom's not a huge priority for them, or they're not interested in specifically cooperating with the United States on this issue. But let's talk during break.
Let's talk during the break. Okay, let's thank Jaydee.